A critic channel I like here by the name of Rise Unlimited uploaded a video today talking about their dread in seeing Star Wars Episode 9. But what I liked about the video was he talked more about his personal relationship with Star Wars, how literally his first memory was watching The Empire Strikes Back with his father, and how his father died of a heart attack just before The Last Jedi came out, and that unlike, me and my friends, he was optimistic after watching The Force Awakens. And he thought he was going to get, something completely different than what he got. And how betrayed and hurt and depressed he felt. My relationship with Star Wars is a little bit different. And it's depressing in its own way. I don't think I have something so bad as my father died and then The Last Jedi came out. But I learned from watching his video that Star Wars ultimately is not really that superficial or apart from its audience. Star Wars, for some reason, has been something that, as sappy as it sounds, develops a personal relationship with the audience, that there's some sort of wonder to it that is personal. And part of why so many people are enraged and upset about Disney Star Wars is because of how personal of a betrayal it is. And the funny thing is, for me, growing up, I had a lot of friends who were into Star Wars, and I didn't care for it that much. I had the same experience with Harry Potter, which was like my generation's Star Wars. I didn't care. I didn't hate Harry Potter at all. I didn't care. I think the first Star Wars movie I ever saw was the first one, and I thought it was kind of cool, but only kind of. And then I saw Return of the Jedi, and I thought it was kind of weird, but kind of alright. And I don't think when I was young I really got the subtext of The Empire Strikes Back. I think the first time I decided I did like Star Wars was playing some of the video games for PlayStation 2 when I was around 10 or 12. Playing Battlefront, and I was like, oh man, this is actually kind of rad. And I watched the prequels in theaters, all three of them. And I thought Phantom Menace was better than a lot of people did at the time. I was still really young, and it started to capture my imagination. It was more of what I thought was cool about Star Wars, and looking back, I almost judged my old self because it was all about the lightsabers and the pod chase for me and the music, and I was like, hey, all right. And everyone's like, where's my, meaty philosophy and shit. It wasn't until I was a little older and watched The Empire Strikes Back that I went, oh, I get this. There was something truly meaningful, that there was actual lessons, like actual life lessons, like legitimate shit about don't do shit you're not ready for, have goals, have personal integrity, have compassion for your enemies. These were big brainy concepts that a lot of adults don't get. The idea of virtue, like not just like morality or ethics, but actual virtue, honor, duty. These were concepts that were, by the 90s pretty missing from media. And that captured my imagination in a completely different way. And that became more like the kind of fantasy I wanted to watch. That's why I actually became a little bit more of a Lord of the Rings nerd than a Star Wars nerd, because that gave me the virtue fix I wanted. The point in which I became what you would actually call a Star Wars fanboy was reading the Expanded Universe books. Reading The Heir to the Empire and the Thrawn trilogy, reading some of the stuff that was written in between the prequels, stuff like, I think it was called, not Shadows of the Empire, that's the game, but there was a book that came between episode 2 and 3 that actually explained the kind of obtuse, weird political intrigue that Palpatine used to maneuver himself into complete control of the Senate. Sort of the story of how he went from Chancellor to Emperor, and the reason why he did it, and why it was the master stroke of his plan, and why that technically was absolutely necessary for him to do anything like Order 66. It was how he manipulated complete control of the Clone Wars and how he fucking corrupted Anakin Skywalker by, kind of breaking his mind, not so much from the whole Padme's gonna die in childbirth thing, but more of the horrors of war kind of brought out his dark side before that. And then the shit that was between episode 3 and 4 in the books that explained how Vader wasn't a willing puppet, that he actually hated every single minute of being Palpatine's servant, that he was aware he'd been screwed, that he knew the suit he was put in was meant not necessarily just to save his life, but also to keep him weak so that he would never be able to kill Palpatine alone. Why he needed Luke in the first place. Why his initial relationship with Luke wasn't, oh, my boy, I thought you were dead, and more like, I can use you to kill the Emperor. I can get my revenge through you. And how that gave so much more context to his eventual killing the Emperor and sacrificing himself to save his son because he found out he loved his son. That his son was what he was meant to be. That was beautiful to me. That was like real. It wasn't pulp. It wasn't schlock. It wasn't just action and lightsabers. That was meaningful to me. And then, I read all the shit that comes after the movies. The New Jedi Order, the Yuuzhan Vong saga was about where I kind of stopped and lost interest because I became somewhat frustrated with the directions they were taking characters. But at least the directions they took with characters like Anakin and Jaqen and Jaina Solo were logical. I kind of liked that it wasn't just all Luke Skywalker sucking off of, and that Luke Skywalker, although he was perhaps the wisest and the most honorable Jedi, he was far from the strongest Jedi in the New Jedi Order, and that he had to use his brain to get out of a lot of situations because he was constantly encountering enemies who were smarter than him, more resourceful than him, more powerful in the Force than him. The Yuuzhan Vong was a ridiculously existential threat that by their own nature was immune to the fucking Force, which if you think it's hard for a Jedi to fight something that is completely immune to the Force, it can't be detected through the Force, can't be predicted through the Force, can't get any prophecies to give you an edge against, like that shit was awesome to me. So Disney's first betrayal to me was right at the start. They acquire Star Wars, they acquire LucasArts, and they say, all these books that you've been reading for, 20 years, not canon. And I'm like, okay, but you own them, right? You do realize that this is a wealth of material that is good. A lot of these books, especially the Thrawn trilogy, would make superb movies. And, maybe you work your way up to the Thrawn trilogy and shit because that might be a little bit too adult. You want to kind of rope in a new range of kids. You really want to keep Star Wars kid accessible. That was actually one of the problems with the prequels, is a lot of the plot was almost too adult. It was literally Lucas, was trying to make almost like a noir political thriller out of the prequel trilogies where, the hero's journey, fantasy, whatever, is what Star Wars was. Because a lot of people don't realize how simple the formula of Star Wars is. Star Wars is not a sci-fi story. Star Wars is a fantasy story, a high fantasy story a la Lord of the Rings. It is not Star Trek. It's not even close to the same thing. And that's why it's funny that those two groups were always butting heads. It was like saying, I like tea, I like coffee. Like, who gives a shit? Those are two completely different drinks. Just because we drink them both in the morning, it doesn't mean they're anything alike. Shit like that. So I watched The Force Awakens, and I thought it sucked. My best friend thought it was a gigantic piece of shit, and he was immediately sour on the entire idea of Disney Star Wars. It wasn't until I watched The Force Awakens a second time and I looked at it and I went, this is really kind of pretty fucking bad. Like, this is really dumb. And it looks clumsy and rushed, and this is not a good sign at all. But, like everybody said, this is J.J. Abrams' mystery box. And there's potential here. if they justify what Rey is, we can buy it. Because let me tell you, there's a trope in which we can buy a Mary Sue, male or female. I don't mean to use that as a gender term. Gary Stu is dumb. It's the same thing. They're all Mary Sues. You can justify a Mary Sue with certain tropes very easily. The chosen one, destined hero. These are simple things. Kids love, actually, these kind of Mary Sues. All you have to do is make it just hard enough for them that they don't glide through everything, and give them a rooted sense in the story. Like, they're rooted in the story. Like, they have a reason, a call to action. Rey never had a real relationship with the other characters, not even Finn. Rey had no personal stake, no tragedy or need for revenge. She wasn't a character that wanted to save the world. She was nobody, just like Kylo Ren said. And she stayed nobody through 2 movies, by the way, but I'm just talking about The Force Awakens. But if she came from somewhere, if there was a purpose to her power, if she was the Force doing something in the world, trying to right a wrong or something, or maybe if her purpose was to bring Luke back, something, give her a reason, a raison d'etre, fucking reason to be. Why is she here? Snoke, where the fuck did he come from? Who the fuck is he? You know, all the theories. Is he Plagueis? Is he a Palpatine clone? What the fuck? He's nobody too. Kylo Ren. There was a story there. He was corrupted by somebody called like the Knights of Ren, and they twisted his mind, and they didn't do that either. Where did the First Order come from? From nowhere. Why is the rebellion and not the official army of the Republic? What the fuck's going on there? No explanation. Nothing. No meat. Nothing was justified. Nothing was rectified. Nothing was completed. Nothing was explained. Nothing happened in The Last Jedi. So I look at what could have been. I look at the first thing they did before they even made a shitty movie is threw away the shit that was my favorite part of it. I think most of the beloved Star Wars games suck, okay? Well, you know, maybe not like, oh, Star Wars TIE Fighter and shit, I didn't get to play all those. But The Force Awakens is fucking, The Force Unleashed, both of them are terrible. They're terrible games, they're terrible stories. I hate them. I don't like fucking almost any of the other shit that came out, you know, around the Clone Wars and shit. I don't care. I definitely am not a kid who grew up playing Lego fucking Star Wars on GameCube. I have no connection to that at all. I don't understand it. Even when I was like 8 to 10 or 6 to 10 or whatever the target audience for that game was, I was not playing baby shit like that. I think part of what has infantilized and created this army of soy boy fans that accept garbage like this is, like, I was consuming, like, Schwarzenegger movies. I was playing, like, Terminator. I was already interested in, like, Dungeons and Dragons. I was reading adult fiction when I was 10. And I wasn't interested in safe, padded, no violence, no gore, nobody dies. When you kill an enemy, they explode into little pieces of Legos. That never, not even from my earliest memories, was something I connected to. I have like this weird relationship with even like Nintendo people, because Nintendo, the entirety of it, doesn't even feel like it's for 9 or 10-year-olds. It's not like, ooh, your PewDiePie audience or whatever. To me, a lot of Nintendo shit feels like it's meant for first graders, for 6 or 7-year-olds. And even when I was 6 and 7, I was looking ahead at, like, I wanted cooler, adult, more mature things that didn't insult my intelligence. Because I do remember watching, you know, in the 90s, you know, there was like the X-Men and the Spider-Man cartoons where they literally weren't allowed to punch people. You know, no blood was allowed. The reason why there's so many like lasers that just knocked people down, and so many villains picking up people and throwing them, and so many just smoke explosions, It's because that was all they were allowed to do by the censors. You couldn't actually, like, show somebody in physical peril. You couldn't show real violence. So when I saw real violence in adult media, I was like, oh, here's something that's not lying to me. You know, so that doesn't have so much to do with Star Wars, because if there's anything that was likable about Disney Star Wars is they reined in the acrobatic flippy shit. They brought something that looked something like real sword technique. Not exactly, but close enough to the lightsaber duels. They dialed back the Force into something more rooted in the way it was used in the original trilogy and not the Force Kamehameha fucking Force Unleashed shit that the video games became. They made the world more believable. They took out the concept of power creep and then put it right back in with Rey. I mean, I got all my hope from the Force Awakens film, from it looking like, even if they were completely overdoing it with the super weapon thing in the rehash of Episode 4, I felt like if they had dialed all this prophecy, chosen one, acrobat shit back down into original trilogy Force, that it would be way harder for them to screw up. It'd be way easier for them to tell an emotional story in combat. The best thing about The Return of the Jedi and Episode 4, or 5, Empire Strikes Back, is even the physical fight scenes told a story. Luke's hubris and then being brought low, and not just being physically brought low with his hand getting cut off, with him being completely emasculated by this enemy that he wants so badly to defeat, to protect his friends from, but to being told that you are born from this thing, that you are so closely tied to this thing, that, you know, part of what made Luke want to be a Jedi was, oh, my father, whom I never knew, who I always wanted to know, was a Jedi, and Jedis are legendary badasses. I can reconnect with the father that I never knew by becoming this thing that I admire, and that I admire in him. To find out that your father is a fucking genocidal monster is horrifying. You know, and that he almost turned to the dark side to defeat Vader, and everything that Vader wanted from Luke was justified in the fight in Return of the Jedi, because just for a second, Luke turns to the dark side, and he goes from just barely holding his own with Vader as a Jedi Master to completely overwhelming him, defeating him utterly in the blink of an eye, demonstrating the real power that the dark side really had. The dark side wasn't emasculated pussy villains like Hux and Snoke and Kylo Ren, who has been utterly had his balls chopped off through 2 movies, has had 0 meaningful victories against any of the good guys. I mean, yeah, sure, he blew up a bunch of ships off screen, blew up a base that nobody was in, maybe killed some nameless rebels, but did he ever really strike a blow against any hero that you as the audience have a connection with? No. Even when it looked like he either killed or crippled Finn was fine, never laid a fucking finger on Rey at all, didn't even emotionally or manipulate her with their forced sex Skype calls. There's nothing. But you look at what was in the original trilogy and actually fleshed out pretty extensively, dealing with dark side and temptation and abusing. I mean, even the war aspect is in the Star Wars books. Like, the Star Wars books actually focus on the whole war part, the thing that actually made the Clone Wars really cool. The idea that there actually was a war, and that stories could be told in battles and through the fates of planets and species and shit. And you see in the books, like, some of the Jedis are so fucking scared of their enemy, and they're such underdogs that a lot of them justify doing things like war crimes. There are Jedi heroes that attack civilian targets of enemy races to try to break their morale because they're that scared of the enemy that they choose to do things that are so morally unjustifiable to a Jedi that they horrify themselves. Like, shit like that is what made me go, oh, Star Wars is something worth something to me. And then I look at what it is now. That's the betrayal for me. I'm sorry I took 20 minutes, but I wanted to explain precisely what I thought was valuable about Star Wars, how specifically Disney touched me in my no-no zone, which is erasing the books before they even made a film. I knew that the game was rigged from the start, and I understand that there's a lot of super fans who never read any of the books. And I know that there's a lot of super fans of the books who didn't let the idea that the books were made non-canon hurt their optimism. I think those people had the wrong perception. And my message to you people now is, so many people are so invested in this franchise that they will go opening weekend to episode 9 knowing that it's not going to be just bad. It's not going to be just horrible. It's not just going to be as bad as The Last Jedi. Episode 9 will be the worst film you've ever seen in your fucking life if you care about Star Wars. I've heard enough of the leaks to know. And besides, I've followed what they've done through 2 films to know there is nowhere to go but down. Do you understand? There is nowhere to go but down. So, the only way to stop people like this is to not give them money. And the closest thing I've ever seen to somebody actually punishing a conglomerate for, keep in mind, The Last Jedi was a deliberate sabotage of the franchise. I'm not kidding. It's not just they failed. It's not just they were incompetent or that they didn't understand the IP they were working with. Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy deliberately sabotaged Star Wars. They deliberately emasculated and then killed the old trilogy heroes. They deliberately said that the new paradigm of hero is a Mary Sue. They deliberately said that only females can actually be morally right, that every male character is corrected by a woman, that the entire point of the film was toxic masculinity. It was a political treatise in Star Wars clothing. And it was the treatise on politics and ethics and a culture that I find deeply immoral, hyper-bigoted, and doesn't value competency. It doesn't value storytelling. It doesn't value ethics, even though that's literally the entire point of it, because the ethics that it transmits is evil. And it glorifies incompetence. It glorifies like women are innately powerful and that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to become anything. There's no need to transform. You can stay a child. You can butt into shit that has nothing to do with you and cause immense change. For the better? Clearly not, Kathleen. Clearly fucking not. There's no reason to go out see episode 9. There's no reason to go see it. Pirate it. Don't pay for a DVD. Don't rent it through a streaming service. You should be pirating The Mandalorian, even though I've heard it's good. If you can't, if you even have the desire to see it. I don't. I didn't go see Solo because I felt like I needed to punish LucasArts or Disney LucasArts. I had no desire to see it. I still have no desire to see it, even though I could very easily see it for free and give them no money. I'm not going to pirate it. I don't want to watch it. I've seen a review of it. I know it'll suck. I know it's not going to be interesting. I know that the shit with Lando Calrissian and the female brain they put in the Millennium Falcon. Now the Millennium Falcon is an actual woman with a personality, and that personality is literally a militant feminist. Not like a militant feminist, literally a militant socialist feminist. And even though that wasn't like the root core of that movie, I had no interest in seeing. I think that the actor that cast as Han Solo suck. I think the plot sucks. The Darth Maul reveal at the end. I have no desire to see this shit. It's poor quality. And you know, if you've seen my previous shit, I thought Rogue One was good. If they could have kept feeding me shit like Rogue One. You know why Rogue One was good? The story, the point of the movie, had almost literally nothing to do with the characters. Which is what saves that movie. Because the characters in Rogue One are as stupid and incomprehensible and corny and pandering in representation as any of the other Disney Star Wars movies. But the point of that movie was the plot. The point of that movie was get the Death Star plans. Sabotage the Death Star. Survive the Death Star. And the main character of that movie was the Death Star. And every time the Death Star showed up, fucking shit went horribly, horribly wrong for the good guys. The villain was a real present threat. It was in every shot of the movie. Go watch it again. When you first see anything Empire in the movie, it's like you're just chilling, it's this normal town, and you look up and the entire fucking sky is just a Star Destroyer. Just sitting there. Just being oppressive at a basic level. That's storytelling. It's not hard to do. It's actually childishly simple. And believe it or not, I know that we like all these nuanced and complex and my twists and turns and my subversion shit these days. I know that's all the rage. But guess what? Simple is not bad. Which is part of the reason why you can give the audience something like the original Star Wars that is good for both children and adults. Because it's not childish, it's not padded, it's not pandering, it's just simple. And adults like simple, direct content too. There's nothing wrong with it. There's actually nothing wrong with cliches. There's a difference between episode 4 is a cliche and episode was it fucking 7? Yeah, episode 7 is not a cliche. It's a ripoff. There's a difference. There's a big difference. I mean, if you know a lot about Flash Gordon, you might see a little bit more rip-offy shit in episode 4, but it's still not just so blatant, you know? I know I'm rambling, but just listen to me. There's nothing redeeming here. If you can sit down back to back and watch The Empire Strikes Back and then watch The Last Jedi, just go straight from seeing what Luke was becoming, and maybe if you can just watch the last 20 minutes of The Return of the Jedi right there in the middle, then watch episode 8, watch The Last Jedi, and tell me that you're not seeing somebody get up, turn around, drop trow, spread their fucking hairy ass cheeks, and just shit directly on top of the core character that was everything that made Star Wars good. The most important lessons were told through Luke. Yes, Leia and Chewie and Han and all them, we learned lessons from them too, and they're not invaluable characters, but Luke is the key to all this. Like Lucas once said about Jar Jar. And you tell me that wasn't them dragging Luke into a cold, dark room, dropping his pants, taking a pair of scissors, and cutting his nuts off. Just emasculating him. Just literally castrating him. Tell me that's not what was done. Tell me they didn't do that on purpose. Just try. Look in your heart. You know it to be true.